I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Jeff, and he's going to talk to you about traffic.
My name is Jeff Pearson. I work with Fair and Peers, and we're currently working with the city on the long-range transportation plan. So we were asked by staff to take a look at this additional kind of land use scenario in addition to what we've already looked at, and just kind of do a preliminary screening analysis on what some of the potential traffic impacts might be. The primary metric we're going to be looking at is intersection level of service, or the operations performance. So for this scenario, we started with our growth target assumptions, land use target assumptions out to 2044, and then we added additional growth on top of that. So we had to kind of pick a midpoint between all the options that were presented. We decided on 1,700 new housing units as kind of a mid-high range look at what might change there. We do need to assign those to a geographic location. So we looked at where the vacant properties were and where that growth might be distributed. So you can see that we have the majority of the development occurring in our traffic modeling west of 131st, 1,100 units there, and then the remaining 600 units between 131st and 134th, and then east of 134th. We did not change the jobs growth in this area for this analysis, but we did assume a transition away from more industrial type jobs to retail and office jobs. So those generate a higher number of trips. So even though the jobs growth isn't changing, we do see the impact in more trip generation, vehicle trip generation with that. So that was the scenario that we looked at. Trying to keep things at a very high level here, I did want to just kind of somewhat quantitatively describe where we are seeing new trips and the quantity of those new trips. So all of the kind of rectangles on the screen there are intersections that we looked at, and we calculated the growth in trips that we would see from kind of the 2044 scenario with the adopted growth targets, and then this additional growth in the GB zoning area. So far and away, the most trips that we see, the largest increase, over 500 new trips during the PM peak hour, is at the access point off of 131st, there where a majority of that development would occur. And then once you travel through that intersection, we do see trips kind of heading in all directions, north, east, south, and west. So the growth disperses. So one intersection does see a lot of those trips going through it, and then it kind of disperses pretty quickly. So we took a look at the entire range of where we would expect to see impacts, and these 8 intersections or so are where we identified as locations we wanted to take a look at. So we did take a look at both the AM and PM peak hour intersection level of service. This is a way of describing how the intersections operate on a letter grade scale from A being the best operations with limited congestion, all the way up to level of service F, where the intersection is over capacity. So the city's current adopted threshold is intersections are required to operate at LOS E or better, which means that any of the dots showing up as red would be an impact under the city's current thresholds. The 3 scenarios that I have on the screen right now, you can see that we have the existing conditions generally reflective of what's out there today. And then the middle scenario is that first future scenario we looked at, the adopted growth targets, and then the third is what would happen with the rezone. So what we can see is that in the future with the rezone, there are more trips going through the intersections. We generally see a little bit more delay at those locations. The only location that would pop up as an impact would be the intersection of 175th and State Route 202, where that would go from level of service E to level of service F conditions. All of the other intersections along the corridor do have sufficient capacity to stay within that level of service E threshold. And this analysis does assume the improvements with the trestle project, which is adding capacity along 131st. It's a very similar story when we go to the next slide for the PM peak hour level of service. We do see that the one intersection that would not meet the level of service thresholds is 175th and State Route 202. But in this case, that is an impact in both the growth scenario and the growth scenario with the GB rezone. So regardless of whether the rezone was allowed, we would see that intersection as needing some type of improvement in the future. The rest of the intersections along the corridor operate with level of service E or better conditions. Again, as I mentioned, there is one impact at an intersection that we've already mentioned, and then we have discussed some preliminary mitigation options, and one of the ones that came up frequently was looking at opportunities for additional access into and out of the site, and there are unfortunately there are limited options for that, especially kind of west of 131st, constrained by the river and the freeway. So, thank you.
Councilmember Taylor.
Yeah, going back to the level of service F at 175th and 202, what would that look like if I have Waze, it says I'm in a jam, it's 5 minutes delay. What would that backup look like?
We
clear.
didn't specifically look at queuing in our analysis, but the average delay that we're saying is around 2 minutes of average delay per vehicle under the future scenario. And then with the rezone, I believe that increased about 20 seconds of additional delay. So in increase, but I can't necessarily say in terms of.
Does it back up to another light or to another intersection, or the queuing seems like it would be something that would be very frustrating. I've lived in a busy area.
Yes, I would agree that if you were to, that queuing is definitely a concern in this area. And I think if we were to look at this analysis further, we would want to take a look not only at the kind of intersection delay operations from a level of service perspective, but also what that queuing looks like and how the intersections operate as a system, not just individually. Because I think there is the potential for the queues to spill back through multiple intersections.
So is it fair to say that when you build capacity, you push your bottleneck into a different area?
There's the potential for that, yes.
Yeah.
And so when we did this analysis, we did use the travel demand model that we built for the long-range transportation plan. So we incorporated this land use growth into our projections. And one of the things that the model does is it does reallocate trips based on congestion. So we do see that traffic patterns were shifting with all of these additional trips in this area. We do see some trips taking other routes to avoid the additional congestion there. So our projections account for how traffic might redistribute based on the new growth.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Bess Campbell.
Just thinking about the intersection 175th and 202, of course we know what that means is more collaboration with the county. How large of a migraine headache would we be providing to you to work with them? I know that they tend to work at a very different pace than we do. What are our options there? Like, it's one thing if we expand an intersection on our own, but working with the county, how is that going to be in terms of mitigation?
It'll be county and also WashDOT. Because it's a washed out, it's a state route. I think going through the Trussell project will definitely, hopefully help and build that relationship. But at the same time, yes, that is time constraint and also just getting the buy off on whatever the proposal is, whatever the mitigation is.
So in terms of when to fix that intersection, do we wait until everything is built, or is that something that obviously you'll be reading tea leaves, but would we be wise to improve that intersection before rezoning or before we allow construction there, or is it something that we can do after the fact?
So if you look at future, which is the middle one, that does not even include the rezone. So that is what we need for 2044 growth targets. So as part of our 2020, or as part of our transportation plan update, and one of the things that we would do in the draft project list is address that intersection. So that intersection will have to be addressed in our transportation plan that we are working on right now.
So when we address it, will it be the same solution for a future where we don't rezone and a future for where we do rezone? Is that going to change what the structure looks like, or is it going to be pretty much the same solution for both?
To be determined.
One consideration with these failing intersections, I think, can also be attributed to the fact that our bus service level of service is, I would say, at a level F. So if we're going to talk about rezoning here, I think we might want to consider making it a priority when we talk to our county to say, if we're doing our portions here with jobs and housing, you got to help us out here. We're limited by where we can go because we're between a state route, we're between Bothell, we're in the midst of everything here. They've got to meet us halfway. There's no way we can meet these growth targets and afford to fix these intersections on our own. So I think this is something that we need to add to our legislative agenda moving forward, that, we sit in these ETP meetings and you constantly hear, well, we have to cut bus service and it just happens to be from Woodinville. So we can't meet our growth targets and hit these low income levels and have enough parking for cars, but then not exceed the levels that Olympia says we can do. So we really need to make sense of what they're telling us in Olympia and what it actually impacts for us on this. So I'd like to see, the stream buffer, what effect that has on parking structures over there, if that's going to limit the amount of parking we have. And if we don't have adequate parking, we don't have adequate bus service, is the county going to provide us with helicopter service? Because there's no other way for people to get in there. So I think that's something we need to explore as well, is, start pushing bus service more and getting that as a way to help alleviate these intersections, or at least eliminate some of the gridlock.